we're gonna go over an entire tutorial of the deadlift. What we're gonna go over is how I coach the deadlift, right, Misty? Yeah, so she's excited. How I kind of take someone from day one to deadlifting with a barbell, what cues I give, and kind of go from there. So the first thing I do is look after breathing patterns. A simple thing that I'll test is one hand on the belly, one hand on the chest. If somebody can get this, where my bottom hand here holding onto my belly can expand and retract without that top hand moving too much, then I know that that individual can brace their core effectively and create that intra-abdominal pressure. That's my first assessment. The second assessment is to figure out their deadlift depth, because a lot of people end up deadlifting way too low than they actually can. A way that I like, and I stole this from Dr. John Russin, is feeling, and you need somebody with you to do this, feeling the moment that your lumbar spine goes into flexion. Easy one is if I had the dowel, I would set up just like my deadlift position, and my dowel is my barbell. I would start sliding down into my deadlift position, back up, while having someone, aka me, doing the assessment where I would place my forefingers onto my lumbar spine, and the moment that I am sliding down and I feel just a little bit of my forefingers spreading apart, that's why I tell them to stop. The reason behind that is that to the naked eye, this could look, neutral, the spine's good. I have no idea why I get back pain every time I deadlift if I know my spine is flat. But you could have a micro movement of your vertebrae going into flexion, and that's how you'll feel with your fingertips if they start moving apart. So then maybe what will happen is, you get that person or yourself going down, they feel it about here, where you usually deadlift down to here. If we know the person can't brace their core by creating intra-abdominal pressure, then there's no safety belt, and that's what I kind of keep referring to the diaphragmatic breath as kind of like the safety net around their lumbar spine when it comes to deadlifting. So that's kind of number one. Number two is that pattern, to see if they can actually get there to the depth that they think that they're able to do. Most of the time it's never where they're at. So if you think about it, someone is deadlifting with a standard Olympic barbell weight plates. Right now, say when you go down to this depth and the distance of one of the plates, how far it is in relation to the floor, that's how much you need to elevate it. So it almost becomes like a rack pull, and a lot of times that's where people should start, is like an elevated deadlift. A lot of times people are like, oh, deadlifts, I'm going to go off the floor, I'm going to do what that guy's doing, and that's it. Sometimes when I see that lumbar flexion, now I know that every time they place load into the deadlift position, they're getting a lot of load through flexion, and that usually irritates the discs. So kind of my thought process is like, okay, if I have somebody coming in with low back pain, they're already deadlifting, I'm going to check their breathing patterns, and I'm going to check that assessment of the dowel to see actually how far they can go. Usually those two things really suck. So in my head, I'm like, okay, this person needs to learn how to do some kind of core stability, basic, core progressions, because a lot of times people skip. Like, I tell people, you need to do your bird dogs and dead bugs, and they're like, oh, that's so boring, it's so stupid. But those are the things you need, and most likely when you do those dead bugs and bird dogs, you're just going through the motion and you're not actually creating the tension that you need to contract, to relax, to translate to bigger lifts like the deadlift. Now, how I get people deadlifting pain-free and never had an issue with low back pain in my life when it comes to my clients is I start them with learning how to breathe, aka what we just tested, and two, how to move their hips in the hinge pattern. And there's a couple ways that I do this. One, I try to reinforce the movement of the deadlift and all these other different exercises when I program. So the hinge. So a lot of times, back to the dowel, I will either get people just going through the hinge to the knees and back up. Knees and back up, just body weight, learning how to do this. Sometimes this is where program comes into play. That might not work for somebody. For some reason, they can't grasp the concept of, I'm going to use the dowel and slide it down my legs and back up. Sometimes I'll take the dowel and place it on my bum with my hands in kind of like a open palm position, and I'll squeeze and push into my glutes to get some little lat activation and then go into the hinge. And sometimes that tends to work a little bit better. Sometimes it's the reverse. Sometimes I do the standard, let's put the dowel against my tailbone, my shoulder blades and head, bottom hand where my low back is, top hand where my neck is. And now I'm going to go into the hinge. All three great options. Sometimes that doesn't work, so I'm going to go back to the dowel deadlift where I'm sliding it down, but I'm going to wrap a band in the middle, attach it to a cable machine or some sort of pillar squat rack, and I'm pulling the band towards me, so now I got tension and I got to keep this position to slide down, and then people kind of get that concept of tension. And the other thing that people don't think about when they deadlift, and there's a reason why I'm barefoot, that's the other thing that we're going to get into, is the reason why I'm barefoot, teaching the person how to have a tripod position in their foot. Because a lot of times people make the mistake of like deadlifting and they end up like doing that hinge but so far that they're leaning onto their heels and their toes go up and they're trying to come back. That's not the best way to, activate your glutes and all those lateral hip stabilizers to drive you back up. You're going to get primarily all hamstrings and lower back stuff. Now, my next phase after all those things is just a progression. So this is where I end up loading a deadlift. And usually when I get someone brand new, 4 weeks of just learning those basics, and then that 5th week to week 8 is when we're actually loading the pattern. Most of the time, I will use a dumbbell in a sumo position. I used to use a kettlebell, but I would always have to elevate it. Going back to our assessment, most likely the person does not have the depth to go down to the ground. Put a dumbbell upright is usually pretty high up elevated, but in this case with the 20 it's a little bit too high. So let's, for the sake of the argument, so that's going to be a lot higher. I like to teach the sumo deadlift right off the bat. Yes, we just did a lot of hinge work in more of a conventional stance, but I find it's a little bit easier for people to grasp that hinge in a sumo position. Because a lot of times when we now go into a conventional, they don't have enough hip mobility and they can't get their hips into flexion enough. It becomes awkward and weird in here. I've now switched all my clients to go into a sumo stance, and now it teaches them to get a little bit more lateral stabilizers going. And from here, like how we taught our first 4 weeks, we're going to push our hips back and we're going to reach down for that dumbbell. And I always cue that we're going to squeeze that dumbbell together, or depending if you don't have the hexagon ones, you just have like circled ones, you can squeeze it together this way or this way to get lat engagement. And from there, we're driving up and back down. I always use the cue, hide your armpits, because a lot of times when people go into a deadlift, this is super loose. But if you tell them to hide their armpits, they get that like armpit squeeze and lat engagement, and you're squeezing the crap out of the dumbbell. So I always force people to think like, exaggerate how far your knees go. And now we're just teaching the person how to externally rotate their hip a little bit more to get those external rotators fired up. Now I tell people, think of pushing those knees out, and on the way up, push your feet out this way. The moment you push out to the side, you get, again, those lateral stabilizers. And then from the very beginning, we've been teaching for 4 weeks how to breathe. So at that bottom hinge position, right before you go, deep breath in, you hold, exhale, and you squeeze. And then you come back down. If I were to grab this 20 kilo in elevated position, now the handle is available, and now I can reach down, squeeze the handle, and again, hide the armpits, drive up, and I'm good. Sometimes just a different, I wouldn't say environment, a different object that has a different feel to the hands could be that trigger that will change everything. And sometimes I find that small changes like that go a long way. A lot of times when people start deadlifting in the beginning, it's more so learning the movement, right? And that's why I place a huge emphasis on hip hinge over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. I don't really go that heavy when it comes to like the second phase of my clients' programs when they first start. A lot of times it's like I will literally give them like a 10 kilo kettlebell. I'm not giving them something super heavy, but sometimes that's the approach you want to go with, because say I give them, yeah, a 20-pound dumbbell, 10 kilo kettlebell, whatever it is, they know it's not that heavy. So sometimes it's like, oh, I'm just gonna like go through it, and they do some weird shit. But say brand new client, this is their 5th week, first time with weight, like this is 20 kilos, so this is about 44 pounds, you're gonna go deadlift it, and they're like, oh shit, like this is gonna be heavy, so I gotta like really brace and like, and then it ends up looking beautiful because they know it's heavy, right? It's the same concept of like, I'm like, hey, you know, help me move and pick up this couch, and they're like, oh fuck, I need to like get myself ready to pick up this couch. If I go, oh, can just hand me that box, it's just like crap from my drawer, they're just gonna pick it up like rounded back, they don't really care, right? That's one of the other things that I coach to my clients, is that no matter what the weight is that you have in front of you when you're deadlifting, think of it as your 1 rep max. Kind of get that habit of, you know, thinking that, hey, this deadlift is super heavy, no matter what weight I, you know, placed in front of them or placed on the barbell, they're gonna protect that lower back. So sometimes you can retest. You can go back to the dowel and be like, hey, let's see if you've improved. This is where test, retest works really well. So say everything went well, we're now month 3, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go into a trap bar deadlift. Unfortunately, I don't have a trap bar deadlift with me. With the trap bar, I find it so easy for someone to understand how to lift it properly. A lot of times, when I get to that point, I don't even coach it. I just tell people, you're gonna step inside the trap bar. You're gonna reach down and grab the handles. All rules still apply. And this is another thing to note. I went from sumo, now I'm going back to conventional. So you step in, reach down, squeeze the handles, all the same rules apply. Tripod position with the feet, push the feet out and the knees out as you come up. Deep breath in, hold for the intra-abdominal pressure. You're squeezing, hiding your armpits, and then you're driving up. Boom. I don't even have to coach. I just tell them, remember everything I told you about deadlifting? Apply to this thing. Lift up and lift down. And I think because it allows, you know, a little bit more knee flexion, people feel comfortable in that position to drive up every single rep, compared to like, let's grab a barbell and now I'll let you figure that out. With the trap bar, it gives people a lot of confidence too. No matter what client I've had, you know, former athlete to mom of 3, never worked out in their life, and now I'm gonna get you trap bar deadlifting. Everyone does a really, really good job. Now, 4th phase, so month 4 now, I'm getting clients to barbell deadlift, whether it's conventional stance or sumo. It's up to them. Anatomy plays a huge role. If I have someone super tall, I'm gonna get them in the sumo position. If I have someone really, really short, probably conventional. If I have someone really, really short and they have terrible hips, sumo. They look like a powerlifter, they look badass, they can lift a lot. When I get to that point where we're barbell deadlifting, I'm going to retest if they can get a little bit further down. If that's the case, we're gonna be off the ground. A lot of times, if my programming hits all those weak links that I found in their assessment, I just showcased one bit of my assessment, which is the dowel, but there's so many other things that I'm gonna be testing to work on in their program. So as their deadlift is progressing, when it comes to movement competency and all the requirements to get there, there are other stuff in their program that's addressing all their other weaknesses are going up too. So sometimes it's like, I won't even do that Dowel deadlift system because I know what I program has been working over the years. So let's just go best judgment. We're deadlifting off the floor now. We don't have to worry about elevating it. So if that's the case, now I'm gonna add a little bit more to the kind of deadlift checklist. And the last thing I get people to do, a lot of times people's necks, when they deadlift in that hinge, they like to look at themselves in the mirror and then go up. And they just end up doing this like weird thing with their neck constantly. They're always looking at themselves. I'm not a fan of keeping that neck in that position because a lot of times the neck, when the neck goes into these positions, the lumbar spine likes to copy it. An example is that if I'm sitting, my lumbar spine is going to do the same thing. If I'm looking up, a lot of times my lumbar spine is going to do the same thing. So now I'm just going into more extension of my lumbar spine when I deadlift, and I don't want that. So I teach the pack neck, and I always tell people, like, think of you driving in your car, but you're pushing your head into the car seat, right? Like the little headrest, and that's a good pack neck. Holding that position, now your spine is one unit, one length, and it's going to be stable, it's going to be strong. And now, on your way up as you deadlift, I want your tongue to push to the roof of your mouth as hard as possible. The reason, it's almost like a developmental neuromuscular like inhibition to move. So when babies develop, the way for them to start moving their head is they use their tongue to direct where they're going to look. And then eventually when they decide to roll over, the tongue drives that movement. So it's almost like a way to reset our nervous system of like, hey, I have this weight and I want to go up. So tongue to the roof of the mouth. Those are the cues that I use. Following this progression of everything that we did is what I do with every new client. Even a client that is a CrossFitter that's been doing it forever, but they're super injured, this is the progress we go through. And not once did any of my clients have had back pain deadlifting. This is like the surefire way to do it from a progression standpoint. Now there's other stuff that I add into the programming to make sure that they don't injure themselves, because we haven't even hammered like hip stability, core stability, you know, shoulder stability, shoulder mobility, like all the other things that play a huge role in the deadlift. We haven't even covered that, but this is the progression that I follow along with all that other stuff. And I've never, ever, ever, ever had a client with low back pain deadlifting. And we get to max lifts. Like, I just believe that everyone should be able to deadlift heavy. They should lift heavy and not feel pain unless they're being stupid and not following their volume, right? So all the people watching, subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be posting a lot more of these. That's it from you guys. Thank you, and until next time.